Hi everybody! Oh, today we're going to do a story, Christian Andersen, and it's called The Red Shoes. When I was a little girl, I wanted some red shoes, and I really, 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 really wanted some red shoes that were in a shop window in a place called Doncaster. And I remember getting those red shoes, and my best friend, Joanne, gave me a pretty dress to wear with them. And I felt like a princess wearing those red shoes. So today's story is about the red shoes. I wonder if you've got any red shoes. Nice. Anyway, listen to the end for a shout out because we've got to remember to do a shout out today. And if you want to get your grown ups to email my number on the channel, my name on the channel, then you can do. And I can give you a shout out. Perhaps it's your birthday, or perhaps it's just because you like red shoes as well. Anyway, red shoes. There was once a little girl, a very nice, pretty little girl. In the summer, she had to go barefoot because she was poor, and in the winter, she wore thick wooden shoes so that her little instep became quite red and altogether red and sore. In the middle of the village lived an old shoemaker's wife. She sat and sewed as well as she could a pair of little shoes of old strips of red cloth. They were clumsy enough, but well meant, and the little girl was to have them. The little girl's name was Karen. On the day when her mother was buried, she received the red shoes and wore them for the first time. They were certainly not suited for mourning. Mourning's when you go to a funeral and wear black. But she had no others and therefore thrust her little bare feet into them and walked behind the plain coffin. Suddenly a great carriage came by, and in the carriage sat an old lady. She looked at the little girl and felt pity on her, and she said to the clergyman, "Give me that little girl, and I'll provide for her." Karen thought this was for the sake of the shoes, but the old lady declared that they were hideous, and they were burned. But Karen herself was clothed neatly and properly, and she was taught to read and to sew, and the people said she was agreeable. But her mirror said, "You are much more than agreeable. You are beautiful." Once the Queen travelled through the country and had her little daughter with her, and the daughter was a princess. And the people flocked towards the castle, and Karen she was among them, and the little princess stood in a fine white dress at the window and let herself be gazed at. Oh, imagine that, standing in the window and letting yourself be gazed at. Ooh. She had neither train nor gold crown, but she wore her splendid red morocco shoes. They were certainly far handsomer than those that the shoemaker's wife had made for little Karen. Nothing in the world can compare with red shoes. Now, Karen was old enough to be confirmed. New clothes were made for her, and she was to have new shoes. The rich shoemaker in the town took a measure of her little feet. This was done in his own house, in his little room, and there stood great glass cases with neat shoes and shining boots. It had quite a charming appearance, but the old lady couldn't see well and therefore took no pleasure in it. Among the shoes stood a red pair, just like those the princess had worn. How beautiful they were! The shoemaker also said that they had been made for a count's child, but they had not fitted. "That must be patent leather," observed the old lady. "The shoes shine so." "Oh, yes, they shine," replied Karen, "and they fitted her and were bought." Woo! But the old lady did not know that they were red, for she would have never allowed Karen to go to her confirmation in red shoes. But that is what Karen did. Everyone was looking at her shoes, and when she went up the floor of the church towards the door of the choir, it seemed to her as if the old figures on the tombstones, the portraits of the clergymen, the clergymen's wives in their stiff collars and long black garments, fixed their eyes upon her red shoes. And she thought of her shoes only. And when the priest laid his hand on her head and spoke holy words, and the organ pealed solemnly, and the children sang with their fresh, sweet voices, and the old presenters sang too, But Karen thought only of her red shoes. I was like that. I loved my red shoes. In the afternoon, the old lady was informed by everyone that the shoes were red. Uh-oh. And she said it was naughty and unsuitable, and that Karen went to church. In future, she would go in black shoes, even if they were old. Next Sunday was Sacrament Sunday, and Karen looked at the black shoes, and then she looked at the red ones, looked at them again, and guess what she did? She put on the red ones. Uh-oh. The sun shone gloriously. Karen and the old lady went along the footpath through the fields, and it was rather dusty. By the church door stood an old invalid soldier with a crutch and a long beard. The beard was rather red than white, for it was red altogether, and he bowed down almost to the ground and asked the old lady if he might dust her shoes. And Karen also stretched out her little foot. "Oh, look what pretty dancing shoes," said the old soldier. "Fit so tightly when you dance." And he tapped the soles with his hand, and the old lady gave the soldier an alms, that's some money, and went into the church with Karen. And everyone in the church looked at Karen's red shoes, and all the pictures looked at them. And while Karen knelt in the church, she only thought of her red shoes, and she forgot to sing the psalms, and she forgot to say the prayers. Now, all the people went out of the church, and the old lady stepped into a carriage. Karen lifted up her foot to step into, and then the old soldier said, "Look what beautiful dancing shoes." And Karen could not resist. She was obliged to dance a few steps, and when once she began, her legs went on dancing, and it was just as though the shoes had obtained dancing power over her. She danced round the corner of the church, and she couldn't help it. The coachman was obliged to run behind her and seize her, and he lifted her into the carriage, but her feet went on dancing, so that she kicked the good old lady violently. At last, they took off her shoes, and her legs became quite quiet. What's going on here then? Looks like her red shoes have turned into dancing shoes, and they dance on their own. At home, the shoes were put away in a cupboard, but Karen could not resist looking at them. Now the old lady became very ill, and it was said that she would not recover. She had to be nursed and waited on, and this was no one's duty so much as Karen's. But there was to be a great ball in the town, and Karen was invited. She looked at the old lady who could not recover, and she looked at the red shoes, and she thought, well, there'd be no harm in it. So she put the shoes on, that she might very well do, and then she went to the ball and she began to dance. Oh. But when she wished to go to the right hand, the shoes danced to the left. And when she wanted to go upstairs, the shoes danced downwards, down into the street and out to the town gate. She danced and was obliged to dance straight out into the dark wood. There was something glistening up among the trees, and she thought it was the moon, for she saw a face. It does look like a face in the moon. If you look at the moon, you might see a face. But it was the old soldier with the red beard, and he sat and he nodded and he said, "Oh, look what beautiful dancing shoes." Then she was frightened and she wanted to throw away the red shoes, but they clung fast to her. And she tore off her stockings, but the shoes had grown fast to her feet. And she danced and was compelled to go dancing over the field and the meadow, in the rain and the sunshine, by night and by day. But it was most dreadful at night. So she couldn't get them off now. They're stuck on her feet. She danced into the open churchyard. The dead there did not dance. They had something better to do. She wished to sit down on a poor man's grave where a bitter tansy grows, but there was no peace nor rest for her. And when she danced towards the open church door, she saw there was an angel in long white garments with wings that reached from his shoulders to his feet. His countenance was serious and stern, and in his hand he held a sword that was broad and gleaming. "Thou shalt dance," he said. "Dance in thy red shoes till thou art pale and cold, until thy body shrivels to a skeleton. Thou shalt dance from door to door, and where proud, haughty children dwell, thou shalt knock, that they may hear thee and be afraid of thee. Thou shalt dance, dance." "Mercy!" cried Karen, but she did not hear what the angel answered, for the shoes carried her through the gate, onto the field, over the stock and the stone, and she was always obliged to dance. One morning she danced past a door which she knew well. There was a sound of psalm singing within, and a coffin was carried out adorned with flowers. Then she knew that the old lady was dead, and she felt that she was deserted by all and condemned by the angel. She danced and was compelled to dance in the dark. The shoes carried her over the thorn and briar. She scratched herself till she bled. She danced away across the heath to a lonely little house. Here she knew the executioner well, and she tapped with her fingers on panes and called, come out, I cannot come in, for I must dance." And the executioner said, "You probably don't know who I am. I cut off bad people's head with my axe, and mark how my axe rings." "Do not strike off my head," said Karen, "for if you do, I cannot repent of my sin, but strike off my feet with the red shoes." And then she confessed all her sin, and the executioner cut off her feet with the red shoes. But the shoes danced away with the little feet in them over the fields and into the deep forest. Oh, now, and he cut her a pair of wooden feet with crutches and taught her a psalm, which the criminals always sing, and she kissed the hand that had held the axe and went away across the heath. "Now I have suffered pain enough for the red shoes," she said. "Now I will go into the church that they may see me." And she went quickly towards the church door, but when she came there, the red shoes danced before her, so that she was frightened and turned back. The whole week through she was sorrowful and wept many bitter tears, but when Sunday came she said, "Now I have suffered and striven enough. I think that I'm just as good as many of those who sit in that church and carry their heads high." And then she went boldly on, but she did not get any farther than the churchyard gate because she saw the red shoes dancing along before her. Then she was seized with terror. She turned back and repented of her sin, and right heartily. And she went to the parsonage and she begged to be taken there as a servant, and she promised to be industrious and to do all she could. She could not care for wages, nor only wished to be under the roof with good people. The clergyman's wife pitied her and took her into her service, and she was industrious and she was thoughtful. Silently she sat and listened when in the evening the pastor read the Bible aloud. All the little ones were very fond of her, but when they spoke of dress and splendour and beauty, she would shake her head. Next Sunday they all went to church, and she was asked if she wished to go too, but she looked sadly with tears in her eyes at her crutches. And then the others went to hear God's word, but she went alone to her little room, which was only large enough to contain her bed and a chair, and she sat here with a hymn book, and she read with a pious mind, and the wind bore the notes of the organ over her from the church, and she lifted up her face, wet with tears, and said, "Oh, Lord, help me." Then the sun shone so brightly, and before her stood the angel in the white garments, the same one she'd seen that night at the church door. But he no longer grasped the sharp sword. He held a green branch covered with roses, and he touched the ceiling, and it rose up high. And wherever he touched it, golden stars gleamed forth. And he touched the walls, and they spread forth widely. And she saw the organ, which was pealing its rich sounds. And she saw the old pictures of clergymen and their wives. And the congregation sat in decorated seats, and she sang from hymn books. The church had come to the poor girl in her narrow room or her chamber, and it had become a church. She sat in the pew with the rest of the clergyman's people, and when they had finished the psalm and looked up, they nodded and said, "That was right that you came here, Karen." "It was mercy," she said. And the organ sounded its glorious notes, and the children's voices singing the chorus sounded sweet and lovely, and the clear sunshine streamed so warm through the window upon the chair in which Karen sat, and her heart became so filled with sunshine and peace and joy that it broke. Her soul flew on to sunbeams to heaven, and there was nobody who asked after the red shoes. Wow. Wow, they were scary red shoes. My red shoes didn't start dancing on their own. I know somebody who likes to dance. I know lots of little girls who like to dance. And I know boys that like to dance. So I'm going to call out today to Violet and to Phoebe and to Forrest and to Parker and to Robin and everybody else who likes to dance, but don't go dancing in those red shoes, for goodness sake, because they won't stop dancing. That would be rubbish. Anyway, till next time, bye.